First thing I have to say is it is my first trip, but some of my DNA is here. So my grandfather was born in the region around Kherson, left sometime in the time of World War I. And so I've been telling my Ukrainian friends, it's nice to be back. The honest answer to your question about my impressions, as I said to one of my friends who wrote to me and asked me about my experience here, in Lviv, it feels like the war is everywhere and nowhere. I know that sounds a little bit odd, but it's nowhere because I see almost no evidence that it's a country at war. But I can feel in people's expressions and psychology and tone of voice that it's a country under stress. So I guess my fundamental experience is in how people are handling the extraordinary events through which you are living. The reception, the hospitality has been overwhelming. So I'm almost even a little embarrassed by it, but from the time I walked across the border, and I had this sense from, customs and immigrations officials in airports, they're crude, they're rude, they're abrupt, they're fast, and the immigration official thanked me for coming. I've never had that. I don't get that when I go back home. And from that point on, straight through to my experience of the students, the faculty, and the administration, people have expressed to me how grateful they are that I've come. I'm a little embarrassed by it because it did not really involve a big sacrifice on my part. I was eager to be able to make this trip, but I've been really overwhelmed by the feeling of appreciation that I'm here. I hate to keep bringing everything back to the war, but we have this expression in English, the elephant in the room. So it's this enormous presence that we almost get tired of talking about. But a great deal of the promise that I see, it's related to the opportunities that will be created by post-war reconstruction. I am expecting a lot of money and a lot of talent to come into the country once this war is resolved. And the possibilities are just enormous in terms of everything from very small scale, what should a rebuilt school look like, to a large scale, who are we as a people, who are we as Ukrainians, which has been a theme for the last 100 years, or maybe 800 years in the country. But there is an opportunity here not just to rebuild businesses and buildings, but to rebuild a national identity. And if that can be done consciously and deliberately, that's a fantastic opportunity. And that kind of thing happens very, very rarely. So that, in the biggest sense, is how I am seeing the opportunity. In the smaller sense, it's do we simply rebuild what we had before, or do we think about how we might redefine education, redefine the relation between work and home, redefine the connection between Ukrainians living in Ukraine and Ukrainians living outside of the country and international partners who are not Ukrainian. So all of those things they're open possibilities now. And to be in a situation of possibilities is, despite the tragedy of the war and the catastrophic consequences, it's an amazing moment in history, and I'm hoping that Ukraine seizes that moment. Well, I don't have any military expertise myself. It's something that I've managed to avoid. What I would say there in a very serious way is the obvious thing is, the development of new defense strategies and defense technologies and offense as well. But much more interesting for me is the way innovations in military technology have tended to spill over into the civilian sphere. So, for instance, have you ever used this thing called the internet? Have you ever pulled out a map that's enabled by GPS? Those all started as military programs. In the event of a nuclear attack on the United States and a centralized command structure is vulnerable, how do we distribute command? And that led to the internet. Similarly, GPS and advances in medicine, all kinds of things. So my answer to the question of innovations in the military would actually be how to think beyond the military emergency of the present to points at which innovations in defense and offensive technologies might have a peacetime application that would touch everybody's lives in positive ways. Well, I would like to say 15 minutes, but it's going to take time. Realistically, it will take time. The task is really about building partnerships. So you've got a number of challenges in front of you. One is several million Ukrainians have left the country, mostly female. Bringing people back is one task. The second big one is I don't know how much people are really aware of this. I think a lot, but the international support for Ukraine right now is enormous. It's overwhelming. So I was watching the United Nations vote condemning Russia, and you look at this big board of all of the countries in the world registering their votes, and it's like 103 supporting Ukraine and the freedom-loving democracies of North Korea and Cuba and Venezuela and, of course, Russia on the other side. So it's a moment of extraordinary goodwill toward Ukraine, which you should seize and build on this rare opportunity. I can tell you, before the war, most Americans would not have been able to find Ukraine on a map. This is literally the case. I'm not proud to say that, but it's true. Today, we know the names of all the suburbs around Kyiv. So, unfortunately and tragically, it took a war to bring Ukraine onto the national stage in this way. And at this moment, you have such an extraordinary bank account full of goodwill. And to be able to use that to build permanent partnerships internationally should be maybe your biggest priority. Well, the obvious one is resilience. The ability to confront unimaginably difficult circumstances and still be kind to each other, to smile at each other as you're smiling at me right now, to build a sense of national solidarity. So the United States right now is politically split, and I've never seen such a divided country in my life, not during the Vietnam War. What I'm seeing here is just the opposite. There are obviously divisions, political, religious, ethnic, cultural, throughout the country, but I'm getting a sense of coming together in the face of an emergency and what that might look like and what lessons the rest of the world might learn from that. It's very inspiring.